Welcome to Journalist Roundtable. I'm Phil Beckman. Today we are joined by Julia Terruso, a reporter with the Philadelphia Inquirer, Justin Sweitzer, a senior reporter with City and State Pennsylvania, and Kim Lyons, editor of the Pennsylvania Capital Star. Democratic presidential nominee and Vice President Kamala Harris was in Pittsburgh on Wednesday, to outline her vision of the economy. Kim, what did she say?
Yeah, there's a lot of things we've heard from her already. So she talked about her desire to build more housing across the country, to make it easier to start a small business and via some tax incentives. So a lot of it is stuff that we have heard before, but she released kind of a very lengthy policy proposal, and it really was focused on, the middle class. That was really the theme of her remarks yesterday, and kind of contrasted how her plan would vary compared to former President Trump's plan, who's obviously the GOP nominee for president. And one of the things she was really hammering home was sort of the focus on addressing the high cost of everything right now. She sort of pointed to her plan as one that would not increase inflation, while Trump's plan possibly would. So it was a lot of things we've kind of heard from her, but she was pulling out some specific examples of the ways she wants to address the high cost of groceries, of everything that middle class families are dealing with, and do it in sort of concrete ways that would affect them in a really specific way. So it was I think more of her efforts to demonstrate that she's thinking about the economy. It's the number one issue for most voters. And so she's definitely focused on making sure she's heard that I hear you. I know that the prices of everything are too high. She said that right out, and she wants to get away from some of the policies that have not worked in the past, which the Trump campaign kind of pounced on right away and said, she admits it, these policies don't work, and we agree we should move on. So I think it's going to be this headbutting on who's better on the economy back and forth. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how specific each candidate gets with their plans.
Justin, what did you hear in the speech?
Yeah, I think to Kim's point, these were a lot of things that we heard before, things like $25,000 in assistance for first-time home buyers, expanding the child tax credit, hoping to reduce red tape, federal regulations, things of that nature. Harris also said she wants to implement a federal ban on price gouging. So this was really an opportunity for her to, further outline her economic vision for the country. And we're seeing both candidates really jockey for position in this area. Trump has said he wants to eliminate taxes on tips, Social Security. He's also held several speeches in Pennsylvania looking to flesh out his economic plans a little bit more. So this was really, another opportunity for Harris to provide more detail on what she wants to do on the economy, because, while we're seeing issues like immigration, abortion, and reproductive rights pop up as, really salient issues this election cycle, the economy and, the high cost of living is still front of mind for a lot of voters.
Julia, are economic issues a key part of the campaigning right now?
I think absolutely, and for all the reasons Justin and Kim just laid out. But if you look at polling, Trump is more trusted. Former President Trump is more trusted on the economy in Pennsylvania. The vice president has made up ground from where President Biden was on the issue, but she still lags behind him. She's especially made up some ground with younger voters on that topic, according to some polls. So I think this is really her trying to say, exactly like Kim said, I hear you. And anecdotally, you talk to people who are a little torn in this race, and they tend to repeat that, well, things just seemed better 4 years ago, which we know is something that the Trump campaign is really trying to drive home. So I think it's like a key message for her to try to make right now.
Kim, the day before Kamala Harris's speech in Pittsburgh, former President Trump was in Georgia talking about his economic ideas. What were his plans?
Yeah, so a lot of things that he has outlined, again, were sort of things that we've heard from him before. He spoke in Pennsylvania earlier this week about wanting to raise tariffs on, I believe it was on John Deere, something like 400%, which, a lot of economic experts said was probably not the best idea to try and, address issues with companies and with, American jobs. But, he spoke about 100% tariff on cars imported from Mexico and wanted to reduce taxes for companies that base their manufacturing in the United States, in sort of what he called a manufacturing renaissance. So He's focused in areas where I think the vice president is more focused kind of on homeowners, families, the middle class, sort of the kitchen table issues, as they call them. And whereas Trump is much more, as you might expect from a Republican candidate, more focused on sort of the business side of things, keeping jobs, making things easier for businesses and for companies based in the U.S. Whether his plans are going to do what he says they are is sort of the debate among some economists. The whole idea of tariffs seems to be really up for discussion, what they actually do, how they affect Americans, how they affect the other countries. But, I think Trump wants to keep the focus on jobs, on manufacturing, on how, the United States competes with other countries in these areas. And, he's really sort of hammered this home. It's not super clear how he's going to execute on a lot of these plans. But that seems to be the focus where he has been, at least for the past couple of times we've heard from him.
Julia, we're a little bit more than a month away from Election Day on November 5th. Do you get a feeling that voters are paying attention?
I don't know if it's possible for them not to, given if you're a voter in Pennsylvania, your doorstep is being covered in mailers. You can't watch a Phillies game without, seeing attack ads on both sides. I think we are entering the point where even people who have managed to kind of avoid politics right now are starting to pay more attention. And that's why, the messaging that both candidates try to do in these final 39 days or so will be really interesting. And how I think for the former president, it's more of a mobilization campaign. I think for the vice president, it's more of a persuasion campaign. So how they do that in this key state will be fascinating. But yes, I think people are tuned in now.
Justin, do you get a sense that people feel like there's a lot at stake in this election?
I would say so. I think both candidates have framed the race as, this being a significant pivotal election for a lot of reasons. And I think that's really underscored by how many visits we've seen to Pennsylvania this cycle so far. It seems like every other week it's either, the Trump campaign, the Harris campaign, one of their running mates in the state. These campaigns are everywhere from, the Philadelphia region to Western PA to Northeastern PA. They're really making a big investment, both in terms of time and money in PA. And I think as far as voters are concerned, it's pretty hard to miss that right now.
Kim, you wrote about former our Vice President Kamala Harris trying to reach out to rural voters and Republican voters through her various radio ads. Can you talk about what you found in that?
Yeah, so this has been something we've seen, the Harris campaign talk about a lot, and I think we're starting to actually see them execute on this plan too. They want to reach out to who they consider persuadable Republican voters, maybe people who are disinclined to vote for Trump, but still, identify with Republican sort of basic principles and values. And I think she's done a couple of visits to areas that were quite red. They went for President Trump in the most recent elections. We look at her visit in Johnstown. She went to Wilkes-Barre. She had good turnout in both places. And, she's focused this latest ad round on not just on television, which, is sort of where most candidates kind of start when they're doing an ad campaign, but these are going to be on digital ads, so played on YouTube and also played on radio stations. And they're specifically targeting talk and sports radio in areas that they know are more rural, tend to skew more Republican. So I think it's an interesting strategy to kind of almost go a little bit low tech in a way, going back to the radio where, a lot of people listen to the radio in their cars. Talk radio is still very, very popular in Pennsylvania, among voters of many stripes. But I think it's interesting, and it will be interesting to see how much it moves the needle. I don't know that you're going to flip a really red county like York, but I think the Democrats feel like Lancaster, for example, is potential. And then they look at Josh Shapiro in 2022 came very close in Lancaster, right? So I think they are trying to find the areas that have the possibility of flipping, or at least gaining some ground and gaining some more votes in those areas where typically you might not see a Democrat spending too much time campaigning or spending too many resources campaigning. So I think it's interesting, it's this sort of big tent idea, but in a very strategic, targeted way.
Julia, part of this effort by the Harris campaign also involves some former Republican congressional members of Congress visiting Pennsylvania as well. What parts of Pennsylvania are they targeting?
Yeah, so I was actually in Lancaster the last 2 days. They are their primary targets are where the most kind of moderate Republican Nikki Haley voters are in the state. So Allegheny County, Butler County, the Philadelphia Collar counties, Erie County, but they actually launched their first of these events in Lancaster, partly because a former chair of the Republican Party in Lancaster is a co-chair of the effort. But it was an event that drew about like 200 people to a renovated barn catering hall in Manheim Township. And they brought in some surrogates, some national former members of Congress who have endorsed tariffs, who are Republicans. And I did talk to people in that room, and I think that the challenge for the campaign is that that's a persuasion effort that is very kind of individual, person to person, trying to find those people and signal there's a home for them. And the organizer did say to me, she was encouraged by the turnout, but she wished they had more than 40 some days.
Justin, the U.S. Senate is very narrowly divided between Republicans and Democrats. Senator Bob Casey's seat is open or is up for election. He's running for re-election against Dave McCormick. How significant is this campaign right now in Pennsylvania?
I mean, it's a pretty significant one, and I think any Senate seat has a lot of value, especially to a party that currently doesn't hold that seat. And you look at Dave McCormick this cycle, he's really looking to make it a referendum on leadership, a referendum on change. He's been crisscrossing the state, talking about the economy. He's made immigration also a very key issue in his campaign. And that's something that's been talked about up and down the ballot as well. We've heard a lot about it at the presidential level. But again, every Senate seat matters, and if Republicans are able to flip that in their control, that's one seat closer to them obtaining a majority in that chamber.
I think it'll be really interesting too, Justin, what some of the people in that Republicans for Harris room do in terms of the Senate race. I was, several people I talked to were clear on their top of the ballot answer, but were clearly more torn or were supporting McCormick lower down. So we could see some split ticketing.
And that is really interesting, right? Because we haven't heard a lot of conversations about split ticketing like we did in 2022 when people were looking at maybe voting for Shapiro, but not Fetterman or vice versa, that they were, people were, there was a lot more conversation around sort of the identity politics at that time, right? And I think it's interesting that we're only just now starting to hear about potential ticket splitting in Pennsylvania. And I think one thing that McCormick has really needled Casey on the environment, on the economy, and kind of, he leans into some of the more Trumpy phrases like weakness and, and failure, and in a little more subtle way maybe than Trump himself. But I think he's really pulling things from the Trump playbook. So I think it's going to be super interesting to see how well that plays for a candidate who is not Trump. I mean, we can ask Ron DeSantis, didn't go so good for him. So but I think the voters that I talk to, even ones who are leaning toward McCormick, are still concerned that he has not really answered the "Do you live in Pennsylvania?" question. I hear, without being prompted, a lot of people say, "Well, but I think he still lives in Connecticut," and I think the McCormick campaign would very much like to put that to rest and not discuss it anymore. But I don't think that it's going to go away. I think it proved to be kind of a real fatal flaw in the Oz campaign in 2022, right? So. I think it's an issue that if McCormick doesn't address, Casey certainly will as we get here into the home stretch, and he has been, So I'm interested to see how the more sort of strategies that former President Trump uses work for a Senate candidate. Maybe not. We'll see.
I would just add to Kim's point, that Connecticut line of attack, I think, has been something that Democrats have really embraced. You've seen it in their ads with, some commercials spotlighting, a mansion he rented in Connecticut, as well as, a mispronunciation of the word Yingling in reference to the beer. I think they're really looking to, hammer home that, he did spend a lot of time outside of PA, following his upbringing in the state. Whether that'll stick or not, I think we're going to get an answer in November, and it'll be interesting to see how Pennsylvania voters ultimately make a decision in that race.
Now, on the policy side, are we seeing a difference in the type of policies that are being debated in the Senate campaign versus the presidential campaign?
No, I think we're very much in this. I mean, you hear a lot of things come out of McCormick's mouth that Trump also says about the economy, and you're better off. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Things were much better. The Biden administration has done X, Y, and Z, and I think McCormick has worked very hard to tie Casey to the Biden administration and by default to Harris. His sort of go-to line is that Casey voted with Biden 98% of the time. So I think they're really trying to make it avoid the potential split ticket, right? And make sure that everyone knows that McCormick is in the Trump camp. And I think the economy is the top issue. I think Republicans are really trying to make immigration an issue as well. I think it's starting to, have some resonance in Pennsylvania, but I also think, Democrats have done a good job messaging on abortion. I think that's an issue that as we continue to see states grapple with this and restrictions and laws, and this is not an issue that Republicans can ignore as much as they might like to. I think some of the messaging has sort of toned back at some of the state level races, but I think at the top of the ticket, every time Trump says something about abortion, the Harris campaign is all over it, poking holes in it or demonstrating it as, look, these are, quote, Trump's abortion bans in the states, and this is how it's affecting women. So I think the issues we're seeing, at least in the Senate race for sure, are very much the same things we're seeing from the presidential campaigns as well.
And I think you can also draw a direct line from Senator Casey's defense on some of these economic issues. He's the greedflation, price gouging, we have to go after these corporations guy. I mean, that he kind of wrote that playbook that Harris and national Democrats are using now. So that there's also that shared defense, you might say.
Yeah, and she actually brought that up yesterday in her speech in Pittsburgh, saying we have to, rein in corporate greed and price gouging and make that specifically illegal at the federal level. So I think we remember the State of the Union address, right, where President Biden shouted out Bobby Casey, who I guess he's one of a few people who's allowed to call him that. But this was really a signature issue, you're right, for Bob Casey, right? And he's really, I think, done a good job kind of driving that home, that the reason for inflation, yes, things are not great, but there's forces behind this that are not just the fault of the Biden administration or Democrats in power. So yeah, that's been a really, to me, a little bit surprising that that's kind of, stuck as well as it has, because it's a little bit gimmicky, but I think people feel it. People are really worried about the economy and how it affects them and their budgets. And I think any issue that kind of lets them see some hope or light at the end of the tunnel is really, really landing right now.
Julia, you wrote about undecided voters. What did they tell you about why they're undecided at this point?
Well, I should start by saying they are a very small percentage of the electorate, about 3 to 4% in Pennsylvania, and but as we know, Pennsylvania can be decided by very thin margins. It's kind of a mixed bag. I think if I did hear one theme across the voters I talked to, it was people wanting to hear more information on Vice President Harris. Which might come as a surprise. She's been vice president for 4 years, but she's only been the nominee for a couple months. So that was one through line. Concerns about the economy was another through line. And I'm trying to think. I do think it's hard to study undecided voters because they're such a small group. But, anecdotally, it kind of ran the gamut. I spoke to a young African-American woman. I spoke to an older white woman in Luzerne County, Latino from Philadelphia. So it's tough for both campaigns, I think, to try to direct a message to undecided voters right now, because so often it's individual personal issues that people or not issues, but, concerns that people are working through to make this decision. But a through line was, I'd like to hear more from Harris, and that they'd like to see another debate, which doesn't seem like they're going to see, but I heard that a lot too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree that it's hard to sort of nail down undecided voters because they're undecided for different reasons, especially the younger they are. The younger undecideds that I talk to are very disillusioned with both parties. They're very, very concerned about the environment. Like that's their top issue, bar none. The economy to them is what it is, and I don't want to speak too broadly, but that the ones that we're speaking to that are still undecided, and they're not hearing really from either party what is going to make things better for us, for the economy, and for the environment. So I think it's really the campaigns have a lot of hard work to do to win over undecided voters because they are diverse in why they're undecided, what their concerns are. And, obviously Pennsylvania, we're a weird state with a lot of, strange, different, quirky communities that, have different personalities. And it's really, you cannot paint with a broad brush. You have to be really specific and really targeted and kind of really get to know these communities well to understand, what their concerns are. So yeah, undecideds are still, like Julia said, I think a small contingent, but they have a lot of power to sway the outcome, even though they're not all sort of united in their concerns or the issues that matter to them.
In addition to the major party candidates that are running in this election cycle, there are a variety of third-party candidates out there. Justin, you wrote about one of those running in the Forward Party for Attorney General, Eric Settle. Who is he?
Yeah, so Eric Settle, he's a former Republican, an attorney. He served previously in Governor Tom Ridge's administration, went on to work in the private sector a bit, and then ended up leading Republicans for Josh Shapiro organization in the 2022 election cycle. And, he really exemplifies this sort of disaffected centrist Republican bloc that's out there. Someone who really doesn't feel like the Republican Party, aligns with his values today. So he's looking to run for Attorney General. He's, one of several candidates running in that race. And his pitch really is that he wants to be an independent Attorney General, someone who's not influenced by, any sway of the Democratic or Republican parties. So that's been, one of his big pitches to voters. And this could also serve as, a bit of an inflection point and an important moment for the Forward Party. Again, a third party spearheaded and founded by former presidential candidate Andrew Yang. The Forward Party is running 2 statewide candidates this cycle, and if they hit a certain threshold in terms of their total vote percentage, this could give the party minor party status in Pennsylvania, allowing voters to register with the party in the future. While Settle is certainly not a front runner in the race, it still could be a pretty significant moment for the party, depending on how the final vote totals shake out.
Kim, how would you describe the political climate right now leading into this election? We've seen attempted assassination attempts. There's still, many of the candidates are still polling very closely together. What are you seeing?
I said to my team the other day, I have absolutely no idea what this year's October surprise is going to be, and I'm a little scared to even contemplate it because it's been so wild thus far. Honestly, I think, as Julia said, voters are starting to pay attention. They can't not if they turn the TV on, in Pennsylvania. I think, a lot of them are feeling a little fatigued. They know that the spotlight's on Pennsylvania. I've heard from a lot of people that they feel kind of this weird pressure to not screw this up, and others are kind of like, this shouldn't be this much pressure on us. So I think, the voters that we talk to, we've heard a lot from people who are kind of tired of the spotlight on Pennsylvania. Like they'd rather, be able to sort of make their decisions without this kind of added pressure of, you're the number one battleground, you have 19 electoral votes. So I think people are starting to feel a little fatigued. I mean, that's not going to improve, unfortunately, I think, as we get into October. But they're feeling it. I think they're feeling the pressure of being the star battleground state.
Julie, what has it been like to cover this election?
How much time do you have
to laugh? But oh my gosh.
Well, yeah, I mean, just the concept of an October surprise after the July and August surprises we've had, and here in Pennsylvania, like Governor Shapiro's the Veep Stakes run for a little bit. So I don't know that I've ever been this busy, or on a personal professional level, like felt the pressure that I have, just because we are inundated with visits, and we're trying to cover these candidates and what they're saying and hold them accountable and ask them questions the few times that they actually let us ask them questions. But it's managing resources and time and being everywhere you need to be has been tough. And I think I hear the same thing from voters. I hear fatigue from the more engaged voters. I do hear a lot of fear, as it gets closer and closer, and they really feel like their pick, represents a future for the country that they feel so strongly in, and that the other side represents a future that makes them really afraid. So it's kind of high stakes all around.
Justin, how has been covering this election different from prior years?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Julia's point, it's been incredibly unpredictable between, everything that happened over the summer, from the, assassination attempts to the Veep stakes to Biden dropping out of the race. It seems like if you look too far ahead, you might miss some surprise that's coming next week. But, I think it's also a very intense time. We've seen we've seen some scattered moments of political violence, and I think that's, I don't know, I'm sure people are probably pretty tired of, just focusing so much on the presidential race, especially given some of the heavy moments we've seen this cycle. So, intense and unpredictable. And I'd say for reporters out there, you have to be nimble this cycle because you really don't know what's coming next.
Well,
That's Philly's my escape, but now that they're in the playoffs, that's going to be stressful too.
We don't have to worry about that in Pittsburgh, unfortunately.
Well, our guests this week have been Kim Lyons, editor of the Pennsylvania Capital Star, Justin Sweitzer, senior reporter with City and State Pennsylvania, and Julia Terruso, a reporter with the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thank you all for joining us, and I'm Phil Beckman, and thank you for watching.